Question is, that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm happy to speak in support of the recommendations in this report. I think it's very important that Parliament moves with the times and that we modernise our practices, but it's also important that in doing so that we uphold the standards of the House and the dignity of this place as well. And social media certainly provides some fantastic opportunities for wider public engagement and understanding of the business of the House and the topics of debate in the House, but it also creates some interesting challenges for us as well, and I think that we have worked very hard as a committee to try and get the balance right. And there are three real issues that I want to talk about. The first is that I see social media as a fantastic opportunity to actually open up the House to greater public involvement. There is opportunity to involve the public more in having their say on debates in the House through social media. We're using social media more to get select committee feedback, for example, invite submissions, promote submissions, and those sorts of things, and I think those are welcome developments. I also think, and that some people won't always agree with me, that opening up some of the interchange that we have across the chamber through social media and allowing others to take part in that can also be quite good for the Parliament. And we can do so in a way that respects all of the things that the Attorney-General has just mentioned. We do need to be mindful that comments that we make in this House are covered by privilege. Comments that we make outside the House are not necessarily covered by privilege, and therefore the comments that we make in the House on social media actually more fit into the latter category rather than the former category. There are, of course, the odd exemption here and there, so the hard and fast rules don't necessarily apply. But I guess caution should always prevail would be the main message that would come out of the report of the committee, and that is certainly one that I agree with. When it comes to reflections on members and reflections on the Speaker, there was significant debate around that particular topic. And I think that there are a couple of points that I want to make here. The first of which is there is a need to draw a distinction between conduct that is disorderly and comments that are disorderly and comments that are contemptuous, because they aren't necessarily one and the same. There is a severity test here, and that is that members will say things across the chamber to one another that are certainly disorderly and may result in the Speaker saying, I require the member to withdraw and apologise. That doesn't necessarily mean they are contemptuous. It doesn't mean that the member is suddenly in contempt of Parliament, but it does mean that they have been disorderly. And I think that we need to adopt a similar kind of approach to comments on social media. Members will make comments about one another and to one another on social media that sometimes, if they were made in the House, would be disorderly. That does not necessarily mean that they are in contempt. And I think we need to be mindful of that. We looked very carefully at the rules that currently exist around contempt and reflections on the Speaker, for example, and the committee, I think, was relatively satisfied that they have not been abused. There have been very few cases in recent history where someone has found themselves before the Privileges Committee for making such comments, and I think that that suggests that there is, in fact, a severity test already in place, and that is appropriate because the Parliament is a place of robust debate and should continue to be so. The Attorney-General raised the issue of selfies, and this was also something that there was significant debate in the committee about. And I would say a couple of points on that. The first of which is, I think, social media can humanise the political process and humanise parliamentarians, and that is something that I think should be welcomed. But it can also be abused, as the Attorney-General mentioned, and that we have seen examples of members taking photos in the chamber in inappropriate circumstances and using them to denigrate other members, and that is very regrettable. I would point out that social media and the emergence of new technologies mean that members of Parliament, and in fact any member of the public, any high-profile figure, is much more open to denigration and so on in any number of settings than they would have been previously, whether it be sitting on a train or a plane or even in a taxi or in any kind of public space. Members of Parliament are much more open to criticism and ridicule than they would have been in the past. That is simply a modern reality now, and we all face that on a day-to-day basis. So should a different standard apply to the House? And I would contend that yes, it should, with some reservations. And the reason that it should is I think that the House should hold itself to a higher standard than simply any other public place. And I think that the committee has striven has worked very carefully to ensure that we have maintained that balance and got that balance right. Because there should, as I said, be a higher standard, and therefore reserving the selfie, if you like, for special occasions, I think is appropriate. There is probably one area where I don't necessarily agree with the majority, and that is something that is simply a selfie, that is simply a photograph, a member taking a photograph of themselves. And I'm not necessarily sure that they should be restricted from their ability to do that. I certainly think there should be restrictions around their ability to take photographs of other members, but I'm not convinced about the restriction on them taking photographs of themselves. And I'm sure that my colleague David Parker, who has a different view to me on these matters, will also raise those. One of the reasons I don't take very many selfies is it doesn't allow sufficient time for the photoshopping that is required, and so I'm not a huge fan of them. But I do think that they are a reality that's happening more and more, and it can, as I say, they can, as I say, humanise parliamentarians, and I think that is actually a welcome thing, because I think members of the public sometimes lose track of the fact that MPs are human beings as well, and the more toughen up. And that was somebody. David Shearer is telling me to toughen up, but I think the fact that we open ourselves out a little bit more is a good thing, and that should be encouraged. So by and large, I think this report gets the balance about right. There will still be debate ongoing about some of the issues in it, but I think the recommendations are very sound ones.